Hi, this is Peter Winnick. I wanted to take a moment and thank you all for being part of the podcast community that we've been able to create together over the last 3 years. We launched this in 2018 as an experiment, and here we are 3 years later, coming up on episode number 300. We have been so fortunate in the quality of guests that we've had. Dan Pink, Tom Peters, Rita McGrath, Charlene Lee, Marshall Goldsmith, Stephen M. R. Covey. The list goes on and on and on. Everyone coming on to share with us their stories, their trials, their tribulations, how they see the world, how they're operating their thought leadership business. However, without you, the listeners, none of this would be possible. So I appreciate your ongoing support. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate you downloading us a couple of times a week and sharing this podcast with your friends and colleagues who you think could benefit from what we have to say. So thanks again. Honored. Hope you enjoyed this compilation episode number 300 that we put together for you. Today, our guest is Scott Miller. I'm really excited about this episode. I'll give you a brief highlight of his bio and then we'll dive right in. So Scott is entering his 24th year with Franklin Covey. He's the EVP of Thought Leadership, which is the coolest job in the world other than mine. He's the host of the Franklin Covey sponsored On Leadership with Scott Miller. He leads strategy development and publication of Franklin Covey's best-selling books in thought leadership. And he has been the EVP of Biz Dev and Chief Marketing Officer. Plus, he is also, as if he needed another box to check, the co-author of Wall Street Journal bestseller, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager, The 6 Practices for Leading a Team. So welcome, Scott. I don't even know where to start. So I think the old model, and by old I mean maybe 15 years ago, of the path of a thought leader, whether they were someone at your organization or outside, right, would be they've got this expertise, then typically they get a book deal, magic happens, right? They get a book deal, then they write a book, right? And then they probably would start speaking, and then there's a lot of other probablys, right?
Yeah.
Today, the book is more important and less important, right? So number of books sold times dollars made per book is not the formula. If this was any other business, and I was in the pen business and I had a new pen and you and I invested in the pen company, we'd say, okay, great. How many pens did we sell? What's our margin? What's our contribution? How we're growing? It wouldn't be, well, for every pen that we sell, 12% of the people that buy pens buy these other things from us. But that's really what this is about. I want to touch on, it's typically fairly easy for a thought leader to go from writing a book to speaking, with some exceptions. Today, the modalities are just limitless, which I find exciting in terms of possibilities, but there are many thought leaders that choke on that. Meaning, if you're more of an academic, if you're someone that's more deliberate, more introverted, TikTok might not be your jam. To your point of going from call to call to call to call, doing 5 minutes sound bites, and then doing things that are visual. You've got to have this mixed modality.
Yeah.
So how do you support folks in that? Because it doesn't mean they have to be experts in that, but how do you support the folks that you work with and getting them up to speed?
Yeah, not just mixed modality, but really mixed platforms, right? I mean, publishers won't even touch you right now if you don't have, 500,000 YouTube subscribers or, 500,000 Instagram followers. Unfortunately, social media, or fortunately, is a big, important medium on distribution. We look for a couple of things. We look for credibility, first and foremost.
100%.
Do you have credible experience? Sorry, you can't write a leadership book at Franklin Covey if you've been a consultant for 20 years. Sorry, you have to have hired and fired and performance planned and meta P&L and run a business for 20 years.
So you don't have any 23-year-old life coaches in your
We don't. It's honestly
funny how that works.
It's why a lot of our authors are maybe in their mid 40s. Most of them are 50s and 60s because you got to have the credibility. You got to have the character. You have to align to our brand. You have to have the reps. I tell you, I think some of our best thought leaders are the people who can stand up in front of an audience, virtually or physically, 100 or 10,000, and share stories of their journeys, like real stories. This happened, and then she said this, and then I did that, and then he did that, and then together we all went and did this, right? We took nothing and turned it into something. And here's all the mistakes that we made, right? And here's the insight from that. I think that storytelling ability is so important. The ability to really reduce your words into thoughts and writing and speaking. You've got to have some charisma. You've got to have some engageability, relatability. I think it's
and what translates, and that's not a requirement for a great author.
Not at all. No.
You could be the most introverted, quiet, shy, whatever, that writes the most amazing, brilliant book, but you're not going to win in this game, right? Just whether it's fair or not doesn't really matter. It's going to be really, really difficult to win. The flip side of that is I've seen plenty out there that are, all charisma, no gravitas.
We've seen them. We've seen them, right? Go to the World Business Forum in New York City. I go every year. And
Been there every year, yeah.
Right. I mean, I go every year for 15 years, and you see, some of the flash in the pans that have no credibility, but they're funny and engaging. You wouldn't hire them to come to your own company conference. And then you see people that are, Nobel laureates or, economic professors, like, it was a narcoleptic sleep, or they had 40 PowerPoint slides and they put you into a narcoleptic sleep. So there's this art of authenticity. And also, does this person have the chops? I mean, when someone is becoming a thought leader in our firm, I rigorously put them through the sausage grinder. I mean, we fly them to some of the biggest theaters in the nation. And so, Aerosmith was on stage last night. Yeah. Literally, Aerosmith last night, and then today we have the stage with one person and spotlights and a coach sitting way out like in seat 6,000 with a blowhorn. Nope, walk back on. Why are your hands in your nose? What are you doing with the mic? Right? I mean, what is your pacing? It's an art, and it's also some science. So we work diligently on your presence, your physical presence. Mm-hmm. We work on your authentic voice, on your social media, curating your stories, making sure that you can speak credibly to different audiences, that you can master podcast, radio interviews, webcast, that you're both good on video and on audio, right? I mean, we go through all those things, and we have to train some people.
I think you implied it, but there's a style piece where it's not prescriptive, but some folks want to be more transparent and more casual. Some folks are more buttoned up. Some folks, it's more logical where they're doing a short form video in the back of an Uber talking about things. For others, that would be awkward. And there is no, you have to do all of these things.
It's true.
I think some of it is experimental, because there's nothing worse than, without naming names, you see certain folks that have been out there buttoned up, whatever, and all of a sudden they hit, like 55 and now they're wearing hoodies, and you're like, what the heck is that all about?
Yeah.
That just doesn't work.
You see it in political candidates. You see what they tried to do to Sarah Palin, right?
Yeah.
Cindy McCain, who's obviously a phenomenal person, did not succeed. One of my best stories is Stephen M.R. Covey, Dr. Covey's eldest son, wrote a phenomenal book called The Speed of Trust, right? I mean, he's pinnacle of the game. A few years ago, I was sitting down. I was not as wise or as mature as I have grown older to be. I sat Stephen down and I said, "Now, Stephen, I want you to do this and this and be this and be this and be this." And I was coaching him on his personality, and he looked at me and he said, "Scott, I can only be myself."
So today is one of those rare days I get to interview a legend. So where do I start? So Mark Victor Hansen is probably best known as the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is a book series. It's a brand. He has sold over 500 million books. So I think on most weeks you probably beat the Bible. Not that it's a competition, but that's a lot of books. You've built an empire in this space. Some of your popular books have been The Power of Focus, The Aladdin Factor, Dare to Win. The list goes on and on and on. So I don't want to waste time talking about your accolades, because we only have 20 minutes and that would take hours. So let's just dive in. So there's so many ways we can go, but I want to go back to licensing, right? So so my world with my client base is traditionally B2B. So authors, thought leaders, academics selling business content into businesses. So totally different business model. You're more in the B2C, where it's selling valuable, providing value in exchange to individuals, paying with their own dollars. So very different cadence, very different sort of rhythms and things in that business. But licensing is licensing. So I push a lot of my clients to consider licensing from the perspective of, hey, you're giving you wrote a book, you're giving a keynote, you're doing some advisory work with big company X. They would love the rights to a sliver of your content to be used in a well-defined way internally in their organization, right? And people, so people don't realize that they get so enamored with the book. Very, very few people, you're one of them, actually make money on books, right? The book is the entree into other things like licensing. How did you first discover, what was your first sort of foray into licensing, good, bad, or ugly? Because you've obviously figured out how to do it properly.
You've asked two questions at the same time, so let me go to that second and go to first. all of us that are in B2B, which I'm in a lot of B2B, I consult to a lot of big companies, and right now we're consulting, and I'm not allowed to use the name because we're about to come out with a commercial and they want it to be a surprise, but one of the 3 biggest companies in America, I can leave it at that, okay? And they're a B2B company, and their market is going to hell because the supply chains in America are dead. Now, I've heard that twice on 2 other mastermind podcasts. And what they did is they came to Crystal and Mark and said, look, you guys are some of the best thinkers. You're leading edge. You've done the best-selling tapes ever called How to Think Bigger, Never Thought You Could Think. Do you see a way out of this? And I said, yeah, we got to go B2C. And here's the product so we can go B2C, because Amazon is killing your business in case you guys don't have it. They're shipping 50% of everything sold in America. And they go, what are we going to do? And I said, you're going to license my thinking. We own the trademarks. We own the P. By the way, I did that seminar. As you know, I wrote a book called One Minute Millionaire with Bob Allen. And we did 30 ways of IP that you ought to be making money in. In other words, B2B is one way. You're exactly correct. But there are 38 ways. There's a lot of levels to this thing. And most people don't study the full market. And so now back to how I got into licensing. One weekend, because as you and I have talked, that we're both omnivorous readers, I'm reading Steven Spielberg and George Lucas's book. At the time, we got 5 kids and 6 grandkids, but at the time my little daughter was watching E.T. Call Home. Yeah. And so you can see how old this is. And when I came in licensing is probably 1999. Anyhow, I read it, and they'd made $800 million with E.T., but the 2 boys, they're partners, as you know, made $1.5 billion in licensing. And I went into Jack's office on Monday and I said, Jack, we're going to go licensing. He said, what the hell do you know? I said, nothing. I said, well, Bucky taught me everything's a system and it's a circle. So you're either inside or outside. We're outside. Sure. But in a year, I will know everything there is about licensing. I'll go to the National Licensing Show. I will master this thing. I'll find out who the 3 or 4 best people are, and we're going to partner with them. And 2 of them turned me down and 1 took us. And we did kick butt licensing. The fun one for me was when I'm 9 years old and I sold greeting cards for American Greeting Cards Company, and I sold 376 boxes in 1 month because I wanted to buy a bicycle, and we sold on consignment. It was on Boy Scout Life magazine. 40 years later, they come to my office. They come in their little Gulfstream and say, hey, we want you guys to write greeting cards. Jack said, what do you know? I said, nothing, but it's another part of the license. I'm taking it. We sold 897,000 boxes of Christmas cards the first year that I wrote. Jack okayed them because there's no better editor in the world than Jack. I mean, he knows Latin, he knows English, and he knows Chinese. He's a Chinese scholar, in case you didn't know it. And he's brilliant. I'm teasing with you in the audience because everyone knows Dr. Campion. So the point is, we got into licensing and it just went crazy because nobody had ever licensed books. And I go, why? I mean, and that's where we are today. If you got the yin and the yang, the crisis equals opportunity. We got the biggest crisis, Peter, so we got the biggest opportunity. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, I really want you to catch the first thing I said in answer to Peter's 2 questions was B2B. You got to be awake to B2C, and you take a piece of whatever the company does in B2C for life in cash and in stock. Because I'm now going into company after company and all by Zoom, and they're having the same problem because they can't think.
Today, my guest is Jeff DeGraff, which I'm really excited about today's episode. Jeff is an advisor to Fortune 500 companies, a professor at the Ross School of Business at U of M. His simultaneously creative and pragmatic approach to making innovation happen has led clients and colleagues to dub him the Dean of Innovation. He's written several books. If I went through all the titles, we'd be halfway out of time, probably 7 or 8. And he's appeared pretty much everywhere. Inc., Fortune, Psychology Today, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't know who he was prior to this, you will after, and you should have. So here we are. Welcome aboard, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on, Peter.
If you and I were to go to the dentist and ask our dentist how we got here, we can predict the answer to the story. Blah, 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 went to dental school, blah, 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 I'm a dentist. If you ask any of my clients and friends and colleagues how they got here and they gave the answers just like you did, if my dentist gave me that, I'd be out of that chair so quickly, right? But in this world, it's part of the beauty, and the amazing part of it is that there is no logical linear. You've got to do A, B, C, D, E, F.
Because there is no career for people like us. You have to make your job. You have to make your career, and you're making it up as you go along. And so those very skills that get you in trouble when you're young, are the very skills that separate you when you enter the workplace, because there is nobody giving you the problem set. You have to figure it out.
Well, so let's go there for a minute. So part of that is, I would argue that you would be a horrible employee at a Fortune 500, right? Because you're questioning things, you're innovating, you're creating, you're pushing back, whatever. All the stuff that makes you the best at what you do would make you the worst at something else that lots of other people do.
There are many people who think I'm a terrible employee at the University of Michigan.
Well, thank God for tenure, right?
Yeah, well, yes.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing. In fact, I was just on a call this morning with the government of Singapore. I've been advisor to the government of Singapore. And one of the things that I was talking to this one guy, and it was just amazing. He talked about how he created his lab. And here I am in my lab across the street from the University of Michigan. I built it with a partner and in my own money. And it's exhibiting a lot of self-authorizing behavior. And he talked about the same thing. And it was really funny. Encounters the same issues with bureaucracy because innovation, Peter, is a form of positive deviance.
Correct.
And deviance is created by deviance. I don't know how to put this. So what happens is, in the institutional mode, bureaucracies love to pull things to standardization. And innovation requires, the more deviant the innovation is, the more valuable it is, assuming that it works.
Sure.
So you can imagine that all bureaucracies basically try and assimilate innovation. That's why innovation doesn't happen at the heart of big companies. So this is why you get called into all these big companies, right? It happens at the boundaries. And only people who've lived at the boundaries, where there's a lot of white space.
But the big companies have the balance sheets and the systems and the processes to acquire the innovative and give them more leverage and scale, at least in theory many times.
No, and that's part of the growth mechanism. If you think about this for a minute, there's kind of a pyramid here, and it's a pyramid that starts at the bottom and then goes all the way to the top with startups, and it works the other way around. So if you think about innovation for a minute, the bottom of the pyramid is always going to be research. There's 21 research universities in this country. I'm lucky enough to teach at the second largest one. That they were unlocking the secrets of nature. It's very, you live a kind of a monastic life, and I do it too. Then it has to go to, where there's technology transfer, and that can happen with companies. It can happen with institutes. Then, of course, it finally goes to either a startup that's willing to take a chance, and eventually that has to sell out to a larger company that's got channels and scope and scale. At least that's the American system. If you're talking about Singapore or Israel, it's going to be different. But that's our system. And so the real challenge of all of this is living with people who have very different skills and very different views of the world and making those handoffs work. That's where we get to be.
I love it. So I'm really, really excited about today's guest, which is Dorie Clark, because her and I can talk for hours on thought leadership. So I'll give you just I was reading Dorie's bio earlier today, and I'm totally depressed and feel like an underachiever. So I would like all of you to feel the same. So I'll share it with you. So Dorie's been named one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50, recognized as the #1 communication coach in the world by Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches Award. She's a keynote speaker. She teaches at Duke, at the Fuqua School of Business, and at Columbia Business School. She's been recognized as a branding expert. I want to fast forward to the cool stuff that people probably don't know. Harvard Business Review, written a bunch of bestsellers. But at age 14, you went to the college program for exceptionally gifted kids. And at 18, you graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Smith College, right? So 18, I was trying to figure out how to open a beer with my teeth. So there's a bit of a difference between us. And then, of course, a couple years later, you got a master's in theological studies from Harvard Divinity School. So without further ado, let's just sort of dive in. So break down for us sort of what you see as sort of traditional opportunities that are still working well for thought leaders, and maybe some new and creative and innovative ways thought leaders, because there's still messages to get out. There's still people that love to hear your stuff. This intermediary phase of get in front of people on a stage in Vegas, that's temporarily sort of on hold. So what are you seeing? What are you doing that's different?
Yeah, certainly I've been thinking about this a lot, so I'm glad you asked. This was actually the topic of my most recent book, which was called Entrepreneurial You, and it's basically a book about how to create multiple income streams in your business. So I've been pretty attuned to this for a while. So certainly you're right. A lot of people in the thought leadership space, including myself, made a significant chunk of money from keynote speeches, which has been hit the hardest. But there's a lot of other areas that I have been trying to build over time. And encouraging other people to as well. I would say that probably the most notable standout has been online courses, which have performed like a champion during COVID. So for me personally, I started experimenting with it in 2014, and I did a course first for Creative Live. Then I did a course for a company called Learningly, which was partnered with The Economist. Then in 2016, I started working with LinkedIn Learning, and also began launching my own courses independently. And so have been doing a lot with that. And that has really just, there was a dramatic uptick in terms of what has been possible with COVID. For my flagship course, which is called Recognized Expert, I would typically get about 50 people per time to register for it. And, it's a $2,000 course. So it was, a decent moneymaker, but I decided I wasn't sure if it would be a great success or a terrible failure shortly after COVID. I'm like, I really don't know what the pulse is here.
Sure.
But I did a launch in May, and 125 people signed up for it. I mean, it was just by far more interest than I had experienced. So I think that there's a real hunger for that. So I think that that's definitely a key thing. I've also shifted the masterminds that I run to online as well. So
I want to unpack the courses though. So I've seen many of your courses and they're really well done. And what I mean by that are people that are speakers, consultants, used to delivering value to their clients in a face-to-face environment or consulting environment or as a professor or whatever. They hear, oh, well, everybody's doing an online course, so I'll just take my iPhone and hit record and blabber, right? And because that sort of works for me when I'm in the room. And I think people, I don't think they do it intentionally, but I don't think they have a level of awareness or respect for instructional design and what it really takes to produce a quality course. It's not just about the video and the slick graphics and the handouts and all that stuff, but it's really being able to chunk something down into sort of it's almost the elements and say, okay, the curse of the expert is I just know, right? So if someone was to ask you a question, you just sort of know right off the top of your head because you've seen it before. But if you have to decompose that so that it's teachable, that's not an easy thing to do. So did you get help from a learning efficacy instructional design standpoint in terms of breaking your thing? Like how did you conquer that? Because you've done a great job at it.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I did not hire an instructional designer. I was, partly because I was too cheap to do it because I just didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if anyone would be interested. Sure. So I certainly wasn't going to shell out a ton of money for something that nobody cares. So I was really committed to all right, what is our minimum viable product? Like, how do we test this sucker? So I think one of the things that was extremely valuable for me in April of 2016, I launched a pilot for the Recognized Expert course. So I decided that I would test it with a small group of people. I capped it at 40 people, and I did it at a steep discount. I offered it for $500, and I let people know, hey, we're testing this out. Who wants to basically be the guinea pig? And so for $500, people were willing to take a chance. And so it was great in terms of validation for the premise, because in 45 minutes, it sold out. I sent the message and less than an hour later, we filled it. But I created the course in real time with those participants. So I, as kind of part of the bargain, I surveyed them relentlessly. And so before, it was like a 6-week program. And before every week, I would say, okay, the topic this week is finding your breakthrough idea. What are your questions? What problems have you had? What have you tried before that didn't work, et cetera, et cetera? And I'd ask them all these questions, and I would create the material based on their feedback and what they wanted to know. And then at the end of every week, I would say, what did you think of this session? What did you like? What did you not like? What was confusing?
So what I love about that is I have found in my work with clients that there's a continuum. There's people that are, it takes them 11 years to write a book because they, polish. And, ultimately it's a fear of ship it. It's a fear of failure. It's a fear of, I just got to tweak that one more thing. And then there's the other folks that throw it out the door, right? And it sounds like you're closer to that, but in a more deliberate and thoughtful way, right? Meaning you are transparent with this population that said, listen, I've got more than a hypothesis here. It's not going to be perfect. And the bargain is you'll get a financial discount, but I need the data. If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts.
Today, I'm pleased to sit down with Mel Hewitt. She's the Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of Serta Simmons Bedding Company. Welcome to the podcast, Mel.
Thank you.
So you're serving on the senior leadership team as Chief Marketing Officer. I think you shared with me there's been a transformation, and you've shared some of that story. How do you take a company that has been around in various forms for over a century, almost a century and a half now, and start bringing it into new forms of telling stories and engaging with customers and partners in new ways? Talk a little bit about that transformation.
Yeah, it's been a tremendous journey and a lot of learning for myself personally and growth. And when you think about how to drive a transformation, a couple of things that I've learned in this job is one of the first things you have to do is you have to understand the culture that you're operating in. So there's a period of learning and listening and just understanding where you are. And during that time, it's really important to build trust. So making sure that the people that you're working with understand what your motivations are and they feel like they've been heard. And once that trust foundation is there, then you can start to bring in all the elements of a transformation. So here's the place where we're going to disrupt. Here's how we're going to act differently. Here's how we're going to behave. And I have found that specifically at this company, people are really willing to follow as long as they understand where you're going. So an important part is to communicate, where are we headed, and then help them understand what is their role in delivering the transformation. And then you can actually move pretty quickly.
Well, and I think this is one of the places where thought leadership connects is there's a responsibility when you see a vision for the future to share that back and make it accessible first with your own internal team so they understand where you're going, how is this changing, but also how does it relate to who we've been before? And I want to ask you about an example of that. So I know that one of the projects that you sort of were instrumental in was recognizing there was a need in the market for young buyers looking for their first bed. Talk about that process and that transformation process within the organization, and then how that led to product and also telling that story to a new audience.
Yeah, that was a fun one. So we realized that the Simmons brand was virtually unused. In fact, it was just on some promotional product because we had separated Simmons from Beautyrest several years prior because consumers get confused. Serta, Simmons, Sealy, all the
Right.
And so we said, Beautyrest is Beautyrest. And that's a little bit easier to remember. So Simmons brand is sitting out there. And we understood there was an untapped white space in the market that nobody was really going after this first purchase, this first bed, the young consumer entering the marketplace with not a lot of disposable income. And so we said, okay, this is an opportunity for us. So we were the first company to have a variety of Gen Z insights. We took those consumer insights and understood that what they wanted was a hassle-free crash pad. So just a place to crash and also a place to surf and watch movies and do the other things that are part of their lifestyle because most of them either live in some type of bedroom or apartment or small space. And from there, I walked into the boardroom with a lot of men in their 50s to 70s and said, we're going to launch Simmons on TikTok. So 150-year-old brand. And they're like, what's TikTok? And it's going to be Gen Z and it's going to be completely different. And I showed them the advertising and the look and the feel. And I think they thought it was the craziest thing they'd ever seen. But they trusted me and off we went. It's been a huge success.
So let's unpack that a little bit further because this is a wonderful example of not only having to tell a new story within the organization, but then also reach a new audience. So let's look at them separately. Let's start with the board. How did you prepare and present that in a way that if they've not encountered TikTok before, how did you make this accessible to them?
Sure. It was part of my larger overall strategy, which is I had laid out a house of brands and said, here's the role of each brand in our house of brands and how we're going to go attack the marketplace with unique and differentiated products, because one of our issues was our products had become too similar. Mm-hmm. So I laid the groundwork of the overall strategy and then showed this white space and our ability to move quickly. And from a business perspective, that was a pretty easy sell-in for them. And then they just had to trust on the creative. And that, I mean, that's what I do. I'm the
right. Right. But
so
at the same time, the question of what is TikTok and do people make purchasing decisions based off of it is a hurdle for some people, because if they haven't made purchasing decisions based off of other social media, then you've got to leap to TikTok in that format.
That's right. Yeah. And so I did explain to them who's on TikTok and what it means and how it's one of the fastest growing platforms. And they were like, well, I don't understand how a bed would integrate into TikTok. And we had a great advertising agency, the Burns Group, which we are still engaged with on Simmons. And they came up with Snoozapalooza. So it was.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah, and it was very culturally relevant because all of the concerts have been canceled and basically all of the outings and events that young people do have been canceled. So we said, we know your year's been canceled, but you can join Snoozapalooza. And so the idea was you fall down backwards onto your bed and then you make a TikTok about being at a concert or doing something fun. And it generated 5 billion impressions. We had set a target for 1 billion, and this thing just exploded.
Today, I sit down with Mike Kleinemas. He's a digital marketing and communication specialist for ThyssenKrupp Industrial Solutions, specifically in the mining technology business unit. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hi, Bill. Nice to meet you. Happy to be part of your Thought Leadership podcast.
You're in a business where the sales cycle is long. It's a big ticket sale. No one is jumping out and saying, okay, we need to do mining engineering today, right? It's a deal that takes a while. And I'm assuming there's also a trust component to those relationships as well, that you don't want to just show up once and say, hey, buy from us. It's about nurturing a relationship. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's all about establishing a social relationship. It's all about engaging with your contacts and prospects and the people on LinkedIn. It's not just one directional communications where you're just pushing out messages or trying to hard sell something. It's more about, maintaining a relationship there and demonstrating that you are helpful to your network. And if you're capable of doing that, of demonstrating that you know what you're talking about and that you are tackling the challenges of your contacts, then you just become a thought leader or a relevant person to them in order to talk about also business problems.
And I think you key into something that is very important. Old school thought leadership was you stood on stage and you gave a speech, or you wrote a book or a white paper. You put information out there and then people read it. Now it is two directional, right? You've got to listen, you've got to ask questions, and you've got to respond to what others care about. If you're simply putting content out there and hoping others read it, it's a busy, noisy digital space, and you're unlikely to get noticed, right?
Yeah, indeed. This is really interesting. This is a kind of paradigm shift that is actually disrupting the whole media industry, because years ago, the journalists were the gatekeepers and were just writing articles and maybe got some feedback by post, analog messages. And now they actually are receiving feedback, comments within seconds. They are on the digital channels. And this also gives them more possibilities, but it's also more work, actually a more democratic approach to the media business and also to communications. And this is really interesting because, as a thought leader, you need to be, you need to engage with your followership and be reachable also for potential questions and comments. And everything got so much more dynamic.
You've gone through with ThyssenKrupp a bit of a transformation and helping people, because learning these new digital skills isn't something that happens overnight. Let's talk about that journey and some of the work that you've been doing, because there's some stories that you've shared with me that I think are really applicable for others who are trying to guide either a sales force or sales engineering team. How have you been helping people through this digital transformation? What have you been doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's important that everyone in the organization understands that the customer journey has been shifted from the traditional journey to a more digital journey, especially since COVID-19, but also before. And that the classical platforms like trade fairs and magazines and brochures and also in-person meetings have become less relevant and limited. So it is important to understand that the touch points have become much more digital, even in B2B, and that it is important to be there. And it is a journey that has, especially in B2B, has more than one touch point. It's not like, okay, people are Googling something and then they are buying something. It's like, okay, maybe they see an advert on LinkedIn and they click on it and see, okay, ThyssenKrupp is doing this and that. And then they get another impulse, and then they are fading away. They interest is fading away, and then a week after they remember, okay, ThyssenKrupp was doing something interesting, like they have something about decarbonization in mining, some kind of solution there, and let's Google on it again. And then they reach a landing page, maybe then reading through it, but then they are fading away because they have some other things to do, and then maybe they go into YouTube or to research again, and in the end they got in touch because they are convinced that maybe ThyssenKrupp might help them to solve this problem. So it's a multi-touch journey.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.